Imagine you were put in a committee that had to decide the name of the Jewish holiday that commemorates the Jewish people's exodus from Egypt. What do you think you would go with? Independence Day? Freedom Day? Miracles Day? And then imagine if someone at the committee put up their hand and said, "I've got a great idea for you. Why don't we call it Passover?" Passover? Why call it that? Well, remember all those plagues that God performed against the Egyptians? Well, on the last plague against all the firstborn in Egypt, God told the Hebrews to place lamb's blood on their doorposts, and then he would pass over their houses, sparing them from the plague. So let's call it Passover. Seriously? You'd probably look around at all the others at the committee and be like, come on, is this guy serious? I'm not doubting that God passing over the Israelites' houses is a significant part of the story. But is it really the main event? The main theme? Why are we focusing on one detail of the story? What is the whole thing about firstborns anyway? Why are firstborns so significant? What's so interesting about the firstborn concept is that in the Hebrew Bible, the title of firstborn is often not given to the child that was actually born first. Jacob takes the title of firstborn over his older brother Esau. Joseph takes the role of firstborn over his other brothers. In the Hebrew Bible, it appears that the role of firstborn is not necessarily about which child was born first, but rather about which child is going to best transmit the values from the parents down to the children, to the next generation. Sometimes this role will naturally fall to the one that was born first, but if they prove unable to carry the mantle, then the role will fall to another child. Jacob and Joseph both earned the title of firstborn because they demonstrated the moral clarity and vision to continue Abraham's mission. In other words, in the Bible, becoming the firstborn is a choice. So what was going on that night in Egypt during the plague of the firstborn? Perhaps, on some level, by removing the Egyptian firstborn, it was a sign that God did not want the perverse, sadistic and immoral Egyptian culture to be transmitted to the next generation. But the Hebrews were asked to do something too that night. They were asked to take the blood of a lamb and smear it on their doorposts, and it would be a sign to God that he should pass over their houses. In ancient Egypt, lambs were treated as gods. To slaughter a lamb would be a magnificent act of defiance against the Egyptian pagan culture. What the Jewish people were effectively doing that night was to distinguish themselves from the Egyptian culture, as the verse says, to separate between the Egyptians and the Hebrews. What they were doing that night was to choose not to be a part of Egypt's firstborn, but to identify themselves as God's firstborn. On that night, the Jewish people took upon themselves the responsibility of transmitting the values of their Father in heaven down to all of God's children here on earth. The Jewish people were the first to bring to the world the values of the dignity of the human person and the sanctity of human life regardless of race, colour, gender or creed. The concept of world peace as an ideal, the values of justice for all before the law, education as a human right, and the notion of collective conscience and of social responsibility, that we all have a duty to care for the vulnerable in society. Today, the majority of the world believe in the God of Abraham through either Christianity or Islam. John Adams, one of America's founding fathers, noted the contribution of the Hebrew Bible in playing the most crucial role in civilizing the nations of the world. But being God's firstborn has nothing to do with glory and everything to do with service. The minute it starts becoming about self-honor, you have failed. A good parent loves all his children, and the firstborn is meant to help transmit that love. A firstborn that ignores the other children betrays the parents. We call it Passover because we are magnifying the moment we decided as a people to take upon ourselves the responsibility of transmitting God's values to our world. We call it Passover because we are less interested in history and more interested in destiny. We call it Passover rather than Freedom Day or Independence Day, because freedom is only meaningful when you use it for a purpose. Today, in many respects, we are more free than ever before in our history. But the question is, what are we going to do with that freedom? Passover reminds us that we human beings are all part of God's family, and of our responsibility as a nation to transmit our values to all of God's children.